I never took voice lessons. I did go to see a very famous singer, coach, but this was like way after To Know Him Is to Love Him. To know him. I mean, way after. And it was named Seth Riggs. And he said, actually, what you're doing right. You're breathing correctly. And, because I have a very big range, like my mother. That's why if you listen to Know Him Is to Love Him, why can't he see? It goes way to the top of my range. And before I have to go into like a head tone, you know what I'm saying? But he said that I had gotten it right, even though I had not had any lessons. I just sort of instinctively knew, or that you breathe from your diaphragm, and et cetera, et cetera. And I guess I had a lot of ability to learn on, because To Know Him became the number one record in the world at one time, and I was a teenager.
And that's very impressive that, because I didn't realize when I first heard the song that you were a teenager to have such an incredible voice, such a big voice at that age, and
Well,
to
it
have
was
no
big.
lesson.
Well, it was big in some parts, but Talia Shire, who I worked with on Rocky, and Talia once said to me, she said, Carol, your voice was the age of innocence. It was so angelic and pretty. And yet when I had to sing out, I was able to do it. And Phil Spector, who wrote the song for my voice, he literally knew to put the high note at the top of my register. It's a D above high C, and that's high, but I was able to hit it, but always nervous would I not hit it because it was right there at the top. But that's how he wrote the song.
History repeating.
Welcome back to History Repeating, and our second episode with the incomparable Carol Connors, a woman who has just about done it all in show business. But her first major success came as a teddy bear back in 1958 when Carol was just 16 years old. She attended the same school as the then unknown Phil Spector. As you heard in the opening, Spector wrote To Know Him Is to Love Him just for Carol's voice. But it was also the first song that he ever wrote. All Carol needed was $10 to become a teddy bear.
We went to the same high school. He was dating my girlfriend, Donna, and we were in junior high school. And they were like smooching and everything in the car. And I was sort of like the lookout. And so I would be twiddling my thumbs, which I still do, and singing, because remember, my mother was supposed to be a singer. And the first thing I remember them dating, and I remember Phil saying to me one day, I love your voice, because he could hear me singing. He said, and I would be singing the pop songs of the day. He said, I'm going to write a song for your voice. Do you have $10? And then you can be in our singing group too. And I went, Phil, I'm like 16 and a half years of age. I don't have 10 cents, let alone $10, because that was a lot of money in those days. And he said, well, if you can get it together, I'll write the song and you can be in our group. We were like a garage band. So I went to my mom and dad, and we were poor and we weren't destitute, but we didn't have money to blow around. And my mother said, Annette, go do your homework. But my father, who had been a jockey, said, Gail, let's listen to it. And I said, Daddy, we're going to be rich. We're going to live in a mansion. I'm going to have the number one record in the world. I mean, this is the way I thought of it, the way I projected it in my own little brain. I said, but I need the $10. And my father gave it to me. He talked my mother into it. We went and the record went on, as you know, to become the number one record in that year in the world. Not only here, Japan, France, Germany. I can go on and on and on. And who knew? I mean, none of us knew. It was the first thing Phil ever wrote, first thing he ever produced. It was off his father's epitaph. His father committed suicide in New York, and on the epitaph it said, "To know him was to love him." And when we were going in to record it, he said, "Think of your boyfriend when you sing it." He was a true producer. He was like 67. He was like 19 and a half. He was leaving high school or had just left. And I was going into high school. And he said, "Think of your father. Think of a boyfriend." And I went, "Phil, I don't have a boyfriend. I'm too young." And he said, "Well, then think of your father." So when I sang it, I did think of my father. And here's a little tidbit that most people don't know. Sandy Nelson, who was a great drummer that had a big record, a hit record, I think it was number one years later, called Teen Beat. He played drums on it. And I stood next to Phil when Phil, I mean, he was such a genius. You must give the devil his due. When he stood next to, I was standing next to him, and Sandy was on the drums, and he went, "Sandy, I want you to go ba 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 ba," and I sang it in 20 minutes, 2 takes, 2-track machine, one for balance, sang it all the way through on tape, no splice. Who knew how to splice? No, nothing. Walked out of the studio. I mean, walked out of the recording booth at that time.
To Know Him Is to Love Him reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 3 weeks back in 1958 and became the first number 1 hit with a female lead vocal. However, the success of the song was not originally planned, and Carol couldn't believe it became the massive hit that it was.
Wasn't even it wasn't the A side of the record. The A side was something Phil wrote, which was the worst song I ever heard, or one of them, called "Don't You Worry My Little Pet." And it went, "Don't you worry my little pet." And I kept saying, "I'll think of you. Yes, I will," which was my part alone. And Phil just loved the sound of my voice on tape. Even more, he told me that. "I love your voice on tape even more than I love it, as much as I love it in person." None of us knew. A disc jockey in Minneapolis, by mistake, turned the record over, KDWB, at around midnight and played it, and the place lit up. And then he played it again, and it lit up twice. And they said, "Oh my God, this is a hit record." And they got the record company got an order for 100 records, 300 records, 1,000, 10,000. And they said, "We have a number 1 record here." But none of us, we were kids. None of us knew. That was the story of it.
It was through being a teddy bear that Carol met a very special person in her life, and that was Elvis Presley. Carol's voice was what made Elvis fall in love. It was her sense of adventure that resulted in their relationship.
Almost surrealistic. It almost was like, yes, it was me. It was my voice. I'm the girl. There's only one voice. I mean, they're the background. It was joyous and it was like strange. And it's the reason Elvis Presley became my first love, because of that song. He felt, and this is going to sound so absurd, but he also fell in love with my voice. He didn't know who I was, but he said to the Memphis Mafia years later, he said, "I have to meet that girl. I love the sound of her voice." I can imitate him. And one of his Memphis Mafia, that's what they called the guys, came up to me at a market and he said, "Aren't you the girl that sang 'To Know Him Is to Love Him'?" And I went, "Yeah." He was a real creepy guy. He said, "Well, Elvis would like to meet you." And I went, "Right, sure." But being like my dad, which was a bit of a gambling man, but he never gambled, but jockeys live on the edge. I gave him my phone number. And sure enough, he called me. And 2 weeks later, he called me and he said, "Okay, I'm going to pick you up. We're going to go to Elvis's house." Now, normally you'd go, No, you're not going to Elvis Presley's house, and this could be a mass murderer for all you know. But I went because I'm adventurous. And I went, and that was the night that I met Elvis.
What was your relationship like with Elvis?
He was my first boyfriend. Remember, it was years later. I had not met him, but he went into the army in 1958. To Know Him Is to Love Him was number one, the biggest record of the year in 1958. And he met Priscilla, whom I am now friends with and used to live down the street from me in 19, I think he met her in 1958. So maybe that was, I never asked him this, never thought of this, but maybe that was like one of their songs. I mean, if he loved it so much, and it's a love song basically, why did it amazes me when I stop to think about it that it was so sort of symbiotic, intertwined, and he was very special. The first words he said to me were, he was like this beautiful cat, and I was like a little mouse. And I walked down these steps, and I was standing near the pool table, and he was on the other side of the room, and he came over and he said, "So, why'd you name group the Teddy Bears?" And I thought to myself, that's Elvis Presley talking to me. And I went, I didn't know what to say. I was like speechless. So I went, just want to be your teddy bear. And that started our love affair. He thought I had a great sense of humor.
Carol will always remember her time with Elvis. And even though she isn't a teddy bear anymore, To Know Him Is to Love Him will always hold a special place in Carol's heart, and the hearts of millions of people across the world.